And and just as with civil disobedience, it's an extremely important part of the conservation movement, but it doesn't stand alone.
Right.
They all depend on each other.
Right.
I see environmental law and policy as the end result, the what we want to happen.
Yeah.
So people do public advocacy, and people do on the ground conservation and all these other things. But in the end, you would like to see these things cemented into law. It's one thing for example, the shark fins. It's one thing to get out there and get people to stop eating shark fin soup, and that's great. But we know that the world is not a perfect world. Not everybody cares. So in the end, we would like to see laws that prohibit that to protect the sharks.
Right.
So I see it as one of the hands of conservation that is a critical component.
Yeah. No, I agree. And is it just me, or has this type of advocacy been working throughout the entire for the last 50 years or so? Let's say. Has it always been there at that level, or is it just seemed, or is it just maybe in the last 5 or 10 years it's been more publicized with the onset of internet and social media and things like that? We're knowing more, but I mean those lobbyists and advocates and lawyers have they always been there, and are they just starting now to be more effective?
I would agree that they're proliferating. But environmental law and policy has been with us since the very beginning of the environmental movement, and you've seen international agreements throughout the 20th century from Kyoto, which was very early in the 90s, and the Convention on Biological Diversity, which was around 1990, and all these measures, and as these measures are put into place, and there's more and more interest on the part of governments and the part of the public, there becomes more jobs and more places for environmental lawyers and environmental policy activists to have a role in doing such. Now, I do think that we've possibly seen a lot more of it in the news the last 5 years, but it's by no means a new thing.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I mean, it's always been. It almost seems like that's where the real, not real. I shouldn't say real wins, but that's where the wins really happen, where you get that change in law. They make enough. There's enough influence and enough sort of noise made. You're actually talking to the politicians. You're getting the laws changed. That's being your effectiveness. And throughout this program, I see where you're going with this. It's that alone won't do anything.
Right.
Or it may be only because that's being effective because other players and other methods are working, such as Tim DeChristopher, or such as Greenpeace and Sea Shepherd and
they need each other.
They all need. It's almost like a team, like a team effort.
Exactly.
One can't work without the other.
Right.
They may not.
And the funny thing is that they don't. There's many. Before I say this, there are many people who do see this big picture and are very aware of how the different approaches feed off of each other.
Yeah.
But oftentimes within the environmental community, you have people who are polarized and don't see this.
Yeah.
And you have kind of the Sea Shepherd supporters fighting with the more World Wildlife Fund, Nature Conservancy types, and name calling between each other, when really they're this perfect balance playing off of each other and completely need each other's approach.
Yeah. Like I admit, I don't really condone what the Sea Shepherd has been doing, in the Antarctic and South China Sea or wherever they are. But I have to admit, when I heard that the whaling season got cut short last year, and now a new article came out saying, I think you posted it on the Speaker for the Blue LinkedIn page group, the Japanese coming out and saying, we're not sure if we're going to go out because it might be too dangerous to go out because we got these guys in these boats that are ramming us and shooting us with water and getting in our way, and it's causing it's expensive, now and now it's making them think, well, people aren't really eating whale meat as much, and there's contamination. So now now within the Japanese government there seems to be more of a battle. But I'll tell you, if it wasn't for the Sea Shepherd getting in their faces, ramming their boats, this wouldn't have happened, or
right.
It may not have happened. There's a lot to say that it wouldn't have happened. They really made a difference there.
I agree with you that at least from a personal perspective about what I'll allow myself to do as a member of the environmental community, I have never participated in that type of approach.
Right.
And I don't know that I ever would, unless there was extremely extreme circumstances.
Yeah.
But I do see a value in the approach, but to me, the biggest value is the PR value, and because I don't think that no matter how much you ram boats or throw smoke grenades, you're not going to change the Antarctic Treaty law.
Right.
That people are going to just ignore that and look at those people as ruffian barbarians.
Yeah.
But what it has done is it's splashed in newspapers across the world. It has become a hit television series. And the average person who was never exposed to this until before whale wars came out, much of America thought that whaling was a dead issue. It was something that we talked about in the 1970s. The whales are fine now. Let's move on to the next topic. Because we've already saved the whales. Yeah. And it hit America like a wall of bricks. Wait a second, you mean whales are still in trouble? Yeah. I thought this was something hippies in the 70s were worried about. Exactly. I didn't think that this was something that impacted my world now.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I really where I've heard of Sea Shepherd before. 5 or 6 years ago, I heard of them before. I sort of knew what they were really about, but when I heard about, they were kind of like the old school Greenpeace, or it's actually one of the founders of Greenpeace, and he left because he didn't think Greenpeace was extreme enough, and
right.
It's interesting, and they're both Canadian, believe it or not. They're both because Greenpeace started in I didn't realize this, and I think they're both Canadian, and so it's for me, I was always like, oh man, like. For a Canadian to do that, you're just kind of like, well, that's not good. That doesn't reflect well on our country. That's not what we're really about. And I started to it got to the point where I was like, well, they're they're sort of like bad PR for, scientists and environmentalists and things like that because of what they do. And then I watched Shark Water, and that was the first time I actually saw them. And yes, they were bragging about ramming boats and sinking boats, and when they did their whaling and stuff. But then they really got into the shark finning aspect, and I mean that for me, that movie really brought shark finning to light, just as The Inconvenient Truth brought climate change to life in the media. I don't think we would have seen as many campaigns against shark finning without Shark Water. As we see now, and the laws are starting to change. But anyway, when I saw Sea Shepherd on there, at first I was like, well, they're not as bad as I thought. I mean, yeah, they talk about some bad stuff, but maybe that's not what they're really all about. And then you see, I've only seen clips of whale wars, and you see what they're doing, and you're just kind of like, okay, well, do they do that all the time, or are they just trying to get in their way, or things like that. So. But then, I have to admit, when I heard that, I cheered when I heard that the whaling was being cut short. They weren't getting their quota. They were getting interrupted too much by Sea Shepherd. And I'm just like, yes, okay, fine, because like you said, right. It's in international water. There's no real laws governing that kind of stuff.
Well, there is laws in it that they are subject to the Antarctic Treaty down there. Okay. But the Antarctic Treaty is allowing them to capture these certain number of whales for research purposes. Yeah. And that's where the whole research joke comes in.
Yeah. We all know it's not for research.
But there are laws governing them in Antarctic waters.
Okay. And it's only recently, whaling is Speak Up for the Blues topic for next week, but at one point the Japanese had they were convincing other countries that were part of the International Whale Commission to change their vote for the I think there was an agreement, a worldwide agreement at the Whaling Commission saying we're not gonna do whaling. And I think it was until maybe 4 years ago or so that the Japanese convinced smaller countries to change their vote, and all of a sudden the Japanese started investing. We didn't really hear about it, but we saw little snippets of it, investing like buildings and money into these countries to say, hey, you need this, and it's sort of like a humanitarian need. But all of a sudden, it just so happened that it was at the same time as the vote in the International Whaling Commission, and they changed the vote, and whaling season opened up again for research purposes.
Right. That's how the international politics has always worked.
Yeah.
You just don't really hear that much about it. But the small island nations in particular, which have a very large vote in the UN and a very large voice, combined voice in the UN, are very influenced by the quote unquote donor nations.
Right.
And these are the countries that provide them aid. In the United States, the example is USAID. But many of the rich nations have aid programs, and Japan is one of the biggest such nations that provide a lot of money to help develop these small island nations. And so, regardless of whether you're talking about whaling or tariffs on Coca-Cola, they tend to play the party line with the donor nation of whom that they're most interested in.
Right. Yeah. No, and it's true, and that sort of brings up one of those helpless things that I feel that that when that vote happened, there was nothing I could do about it, and there was nothing really an organization can do about it, and there was nothing our country could do about it. It was a vote by a number of nations, and we had no say, even if we didn't believe it. And if you think about it, if you polled the world and they asked, do you think whaling should go on, what do you think the result would be? I would imagine people would be like, no, I don't think so. Because, how often are we exposed to whale meat? Maybe some other nations, like
the West. The West would be appalled.
Yeah. I guess. But do you think like nations in Africa, who may not see whales a lot, maybe in the Asian countries, maybe they'd be more apt to it, and there's probably a lot more people there than there are in the West. But that's how I felt at that time, where it was just like, no, this isn't right, but there's nothing I can do about it, and so seeing the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society go out there, you're just kind of like, well, okay, good. Like, I didn't hate it anymore. I was kind of like, I don't like what they were doing and how they were going about it, but it was the last straw I saw.
An interesting tie-in with this whole conversation about Tim the Christopher is that there was a member of Sea Shepherd, a New Zealand man named Peter Bethune, who was on the show Whale Wars and was driving a speedboat, and that the speedboat was crashed into by one of the large Japanese whaling vessels. He then boarded the Japanese whaling vessel and demanded them to pay for the boat. At which time he was arrested by the Japanese Coast Guard, and taken back to Japan and placed into Japanese prison for 5 months.
Ooh.
And he was eventually tried, found guilty, but given a 2-year suspended prison term and deported from the country. And I watched an interview with him earlier today in thinking about this topic.
Yeah.
And somebody was asking him about his prison experience, and he acknowledged that it was a horrible experience, and it was something that he wouldn't want to repeat again. Mm-hmm. But he said that